Welcome to the Sci-Fi Evolution channel. An alien mother sold herself to feed her child, but the man who bought her chose love. Kalen Storm knew better than to linger in places of decay, but this station, Veritas 9, was like a wound on the remains of the forgotten moon Eridanus I. She reminded him too much of home for him to ignore this empty, rusty place. Still pretending to be here on business, he stepped off the elevator platform, his boots clattering on the grates, his shoulders hunched from the musty warmth of the recycled air. Every corridor hummed with the subtle noise of old electronics struggling with the forces of entropy. He didn't worry about his name here. No one cared, no one asked. They only looked at what you had or what you could take. A century ago, this station might have been a bustling mining center. But now it was a corpse being ransacked by desperate merchants and those who had stopped pretending to be someone else. He moved along its metal decks lined with plastic awnings, past shimmering consoles and vendors. The woman's arms were hugging the child. Her skin was a delicate iridescent blue color, reminiscent of the reflection of glacial water in the moonlight. Her long, white hair cascaded down her back in a thick braid, disheveled and uneven, as if hastily tied. She remained motionless, her gaze fixed on him, her eyes wide, slanted, and deeply tired. The child in her arms, a small one, maybe 5 or 6 years old, had the same pale blue skin and white hair, but was not motionless. She was moving slightly, her hands clutching the folds of her mother's worn robe. Her golden eyes, too big for her face, were watching him intently. Kalen stopped a few steps away from them. "I have nothing left," the woman said softly, her voice carrying a soft alien accent softened by exhaustion. "Just her. She's hungry." Kalen was silent. "I'm offering myself in exchange," she continued. "Not for pleasure, but for safety, for warmth, for sustenance for her." He exhaled slowly, almost with a sigh. Ares nodded, her eyes still fixed on Kalen. "I believe you," she said. Kalen smiled, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "Okay," he said. "Now let's find you some food." Ares hesitated, as if she had misheard. The idea of security seemed unfamiliar to her. "I won't take anything from you," he said softly. "Please come with me." Still on her knees, she pressed her forehead against her daughter, then slowly rose to her feet, moving like a person who is afraid of any sudden movement that could ruin the moment. Her body was thin under the robe, emaciated, and she carried the girl as if she weighed nothing. Kalen wordlessly led them to the exit. He didn't look back. The striped ship, the Wanderer of the Abyss, was waiting on the dock, squat and patched, like the man who controlled it. She wasn't pretty, but she flew, and more importantly, she was his. He opened the ramp and waited for Ares to step inside, her eyes scanning every corner of the ship as if waiting for a trap. He gestured towards the central corridor. "You will sleep in the crew showers. There are clean towels and hot water." "Usually." Ares did not answer. Her eyes were already shining, but not from tears, but from the warmth of his kindness. He went into the galley and took out a canister of canned broth and dehydrated cereals. He didn't cook often, but he warmed everything up properly. He found a clean bowl and even added a pinch of salt. When he returned, Ares was sitting on the edge of the cot, holding Lyra in her lap like a protective shield. He placed the bowl on the table next to them. He thought about the girl he couldn't save and the collapse of the colony wall. "It's safe," he said. Lyra didn't wait. She greedily reached for the food and started eating, too fast. She choked and immediately started coughing violently. Ares shuddered, pulling her closer. "Slow down, my dear," she said. Kalen instinctively moved forward, but Ares's hand abruptly, but not threateningly, but out of protective instinct, rose up. Lyra calmed down, took a deep breath, and began to eat more slowly. "She's fine," Kalen said. Ares nodded, her gaze fixed on the bowl as if it were a sacred object. When she looked up, her voice cracked. "I don't understand. Why are you doing this?" Kalen considered his answer, remembering the girl he couldn't save many years ago and the collapse of the colony wall. Before he could return to the silence that followed her scream, he said, "No way. Because I can." He muttered this, then turned around and left them alone in the cabin. He sat down heavily in his chair and stared at the navigation screen. His soft blue lights flickered on his face. Outside, the station loomed dark and broken, slowly rotating in the blackness. He closed his eyes, trying not to think about the two figures in the room behind him, trying not to worry, but somewhere deep inside the station, the trader realized that his cargo was gone. Not the kind of cargo that can be stolen. The hum of the ship was steady, like a pulse under a metal skin. Somewhere in the darkness, water hissed through worn pipes. Recycled air whistled faintly through the vents, and the cold emptiness of space pressed down on the hull like bated breath. There was silence inside. Kalen Storm leaned against the bulkhead, just outside the crew's sleeping quarters. Arms crossed over his chest, he listened to what was happening inside the room. He could hear the soft, uneven rhythm of the child's breathing, one heavy breath, then one lighter one. No crying, no whispering, just a dream. He let it comfort him for a while. It was after midnight ship time, and the lights were dimmed to a faint orange glow in the hallway. He should have gone to bed an hour ago, but he didn't. Instead, he stood there, not moving, not understanding why. The woman, Ares, did not lock the door. That alone should have told him a lot. Either she already trusted him, or she was too tired to care if she lived or died. The thought burned his mind. He ran a hand over his jaw, the stubble grating against his palm. Then he turned around and walked back to the galley. His bare footsteps were muffled on the floor. He warmed up a bag of protein broth, not because he was hungry, but because this movement seemed necessary. The spoon clattered against the edge of the tin bowl as he stirred, slower than necessary. Ares' voice haunted him for a long time after she spoke. "I offer myself in exchange, not for pleasure, but for safety, for warmth, for food." He had heard despair before, but not like this. Her words weren't pleading, it wasn't bargaining, it was a quiet surrender, tinged with steel. It wasn't that she wanted to be saved, she had already accepted that she wouldn't be saved. That's what shocked him. He poured the soup into 2 bowls and placed them on the galley table, then poured it into a smaller bowl for the girl. He hesitated, then added a pinch of salt to the child's bowl. Something like a memory stirred. Someone had once told him that salt was what made tasteless food alive. He was still staring at the steam when they entered. Ares walked softly, her bare feet noiseless on the metal floor. Her long white hair was damp, carelessly curled and falling down her back. She was wearing an emergency robe from the locker, awkwardly tied at the waist. It looked like it had been borrowed in every way. Her blue skin, although freshly washed, still showed traces. Faint bruises covered her forearms, and a healing cut was under her collarbone. She stood in the doorway like a guest who had not yet been told she was allowed to stay. Next to her was a girl, Lyra. She clung to the folds of Ares' robe, but did not hide her golden eyes, which scanned the room with intense interest. She looked better, still thin and pale, but her movements weren't as sluggish. She sniffed the air and blinked at the bowls on the table. Kalen stepped back and nodded at the seats. "It's not much, but it's hot," he said. Ares didn't say anything, but led Lyra forward. The girl climbed onto the seat on her lap, then reached for the smallest bowl. She froze. Kalen watched as her fingers hovered. "You can eat," he said softly. "It's okay, Lyra." She looked at her mother, who nodded slowly and soundlessly. Then she started eating. This time, she wasn't eating like an animal. She ate quickly, yes, but not with a panicky hunger that she had before. She paused between bites, chewed, and even blew on them. There were small signs on the spoon, but signs that mattered. Aries took a medium bowl and sat down in front of him. She wrapped her arms around it, as if checking if it really belonged to her. When she finally took a sip, her eyes closed, not dramatically, but briefly, as if the warmth from him had weakened something inside her. She didn't realize she was frozen. She didn't speak, and neither did he. They ate in silence for a while. When Lyra finished, she turned to the tiny paper bag on the table next to her. "What is it? What is it?" she whispered. "Salt," Kaelin replied. "Just salt." She tasted a grain, and her face wrinkled. "Sharp?" He smiled a little. "Yes, it's a good joke." Aries looked at her daughter, and something softened on her face. It wasn't a joy, of course, but it was the closest thing he had ever seen. It made her look younger and less wary. Kaelin put away the bowls and rinsed them in the sink. The water was cold. He dried them. His hands were on a rough towel, and he turned to them. "Where are you from?" he asked. Aries' fingers brushed through Lyra's hair behind her small ear, but she didn't take her eyes off the child. "In the forest world," she said. "We lived by the lake. It's called the Heavenly Singer." "What's your name?" he asked, and she told him her name. He nodded, memorizing it. She continued. Her voice became quieter. But there was an illness, and there were no medications. There were no loans. Her kinsman got sick first, and Lyra was too young to remember. She ran her thumb over the child's forehead in a slow, circular motion. The child was dozing, lulled by warmth and safety. They said she was unclean, a waste of time. Kaelin suppressed the urge to speak. The instinct to say, "I'm sorry," seemed too small, too human. Instead, he sat down next to the seat and gently lifted Lyra into his arms. She stirred, muttered something in her native language, and curled up against his chest as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Easy," he said, half whispering. "Too light." Aries stood up quickly, frightened. Not in protest, just from an unfamiliar feeling. She held out her hand as if to take the child back. "It's all right," he said. "I'll put her down." She hesitated again, then let go. Most of all, he felt trusted. He carried Lyra to the cot and laid her down. She didn't wake up. Aries stood in the doorway, uncertain. "You can sleep here too," he told her. "I'll take a seat in the cockpit." "I won't," she began. He shook his head. "It's okay." Then he added, "Hush. Sleep is a kind of trust that you have earned." She didn't move immediately, but eventually entered the room and pulled the blanket over her daughter. Kaelin left her there, alone in the warm silence, and returned to the front of the ship. He sat in the pilot's seat and stared into the void. After a few minutes, he disabled the ship's identifier, disabled the tracker, and rewrote the beacon to broadcast a false name, because somewhere out there someone will notice that the debt has not been paid. And when they come looking, they will not knock, and he will not allow them to approach this little girl again. Kaelin woke to the faint sound of metal sliding against metal, the kind of noise that only matters if you've lived alone long enough to notice every breath your ship takes. For a moment, he remained motionless in the cockpit seat, letting the hum of the abyss wanderer envelop him. His body ached from an uncomfortable sleep. One leg hung off the armrest, and there was a pulse in his neck that throbbed when he turned. But it wasn't the discomfort that kept him in place. It was a scent, warm, subtle, alien. His eyes opened completely, not to the smell of coolant or ionized air, not rust or machine grease. It was an earthy, grassy, slightly pungent smell, like something slowly boiling with intent. Someone was cooking. He stood up and followed the scent, his bare feet whispering on the cold steel. The light in the galley was dimmed to a soft yellow, and there, standing by the tiny stove, with her sleeves rolled up and her silver-white hair tied casually around her neck, was Aries. She looked different in the morning light, or maybe not so different, just more real. Her blue skin was still pale at the edges, her bioluminescent markings faint but visible now that she wasn't hiding them under layers of tension. She moved like someone who was used to quiet mornings rather than cold metal ships. Kalen didn't speak at first. He watched as she stirred something in a small pot. She must have found something in the ship's lockers. She found the root paste, added the broth, and seasoned it somehow. He wasn't sure how. He hadn't kept the spices in years. Maybe she'd brought them with her, hidden somewhere among her meager possessions. "You shouldn't have done that," he finally said. She didn't flinch. "I wanted to. I know, but you fed me, and I remember how to cook," he said, coming closer. His hands relaxed.